Hi. One of the best things about podcasts is you don't have to see everyone you're speaking to. So this is a lot more nerve-wracking than I'm normally used to. But as Vera said, I'm Alastair or Ali. I've got to meet a lot of you already today. But for those of you I have not met, this is, hopefully will give you a bit of an insight into what I do and how we think about podcasts. Um, this is me. I grew up and studied in Scotland. This was me making my journalism and audio debut all in one on a student radio show. Thankfully for the journalism industry, I didn't stick at it for very long because I wasn't very good at it. So I have a huge appreciation for what all of you do, much better than I did. But the reason I guess Spotify and I'm here today is that there is, we have a deep appreciation for what you do. There really has never been a more important time for listeners and audiences to have access to reliable, trustworthy information from the best content creators in the markets. And I think that's been brought into very sharp focus in recent times. The two examples I threw up on the screen are, obviously the war in Ukraine and also the COVID pandemic, and how users access information around those topics in an audio environment as well. But I've been asked to speak about news podcasting and the opportunity for journalists and podcasting more generally. And so we can run through some examples of what that is. Obviously difficult to do in 30 minutes. There's a lot to this. But I will try to leave you with a few sort of high-level takeaways of inspiration and ideas for where to go from here. The general themes I think we can explore in this are the sort of local versus global nature of podcasting audiences, and a couple of examples of where this has been changing a lot in recent times, and I think presents big opportunities for you. The second is creators. I think represented in the people I've spoken to outside today and the people in this room, there are some very established media brands here and present, and there's also some more emerging creators as well that are coming into this space, and I think podcasting presents big opportunities for both sets. And finally, how to make great content that audiences respond to and resonate with and build that forward. So I'll talk a bit about the cadence and always on versus limited series approach that creators have adopted. But this is the last session. I'm aware everyone's probably ready to go for a drink. I will try to add a bit of interactivity. By way of a show of hands, sorry, I don't know if you can see this, but by way of a show of hands, who has seen this show? Okay, this is good. I needed a big response like that for this to work, so thank you. Pretty amazing. This is a show that obviously topped the charts. For those that didn't put your hands up, it's called Squid Game. It's a show that topped the charts across so many markets. And don't worry, I'm going to finish the loop on this. You're probably like, why has he put this on the slide? But this is a show that originated in Korea. And pretty incredible that a show like that has been seen by such a globally distributed audience. Obviously in video, they have the advantage. They can add subtitles and often add dubs, and that can greatly extend the reach of the content that they make. But we see a very similar thing happening at Spotify with the data we have access to in music. Back in 2014, the sort of music exports routes were very transatlantic. And increasingly now, what this chart is showing you is, listeners are listening to content created by artists all over the world in a way they never really have before. And that's changing creator tastes, it's changing listener tastes, and it's also being proliferated by technology changes and platforms like ours. And I think this is really exciting. By comparison to my sort of video and music example, and I think those of you in this room probably know this much better than I do, talk audio listening is significantly more local. If I pull up the number one podcasts as of a couple of weeks ago on our charts, there's very little overlap. All of the podcasts represented on this slide are in the language or the predominant language of the country they were made. And also just vastly different genres represented. If I look at Indonesia, it's a very young woman talking about what life is like as a young woman growing up in Jakarta. By comparison to the UK example where I'm from and probably know better, where you have a dragon from Dragon's Den interviewing celebrities and CEO type figures. Very different user taste and the industry is serving very different needs as well. But indeed, podcasts are 67% more likely to be consumed in the market that they originate by comparison to music. So when I say it's a hyper-local medium by comparison, that's kind of what I'm getting at. And there's obviously a lot of reasons for that too. We see this changing though. Like increasingly, this is becoming more global in the way that music has happened. It's definitely not there to the same extent yet. But again, because of a lot of the content creation that this group is doing, because of the technological advances that allow audiences to find things in new languages, this is changing. This was the first GIF I ever made, or GIF, depending on how you say it. So thanks for paying attention to it. And one of the things that we're very eager to do in my role at Spotify, we obviously create some original and exclusive content as well. We want to proliferate the audience we can reach. And I'm guessing a lot of you want to reach bigger audiences as well in whatever capacity you're producing content, be it news or entertainment. And so I have an entertainment example to use as a bit of inspiration, which is Batman Unburied. This is a fictional podcast that we released a few months ago, and it's been a huge success for us, one of our biggest hits that we've released globally. And I think the reason this worked so well is that we didn't write a script in English, cast big name Hollywood talent, and then record the show, and then have local voice actors come in different markets and voice over the top. We essentially made the podcast 9 different times in parallel. So we worked with local directors, local sort of top tier talent in each of these markets. Hopefully some of you have listened, to essentially tell the story in the most meaningful way for the audience who are going to hear it. And I think we're at the stage in media, entertainment, and news where audiences simply will not settle or respond well to something which is not primarily made for them. They don't want to hear a dubbed or retranslated, or we call it reheated dinner approach to the content they receive. They want a best-in-class experience. And I think this is an approach that definitely, obviously transcends fictional podcasts as well. We did a similar approach with a documentary series about Maradona, an iconic Argentinian footballer. This is a show that we made, a documentary series that we released on the 1-year anniversary of his death. And again, it wasn't about writing the story from one perspective and telling that to a global audience, but rather thinking, how do listeners in France view him as a figure versus those in the UK? I don't know if there's any football fans in the room, but England fans, maybe not the biggest fan of Maradona, whereas he's obviously a bit of a hero in Argentina. And so the journalists who told this story in the context of the host, who was actually the one voicing the story, varied very differently place to place. And I think it was a good example of one piece of cover art, but fundamentally 6 different stories from 6 different perspectives. To bring all of this back to news, which you were probably hoping I might do, I think the key point to land here is that news podcasts is probably the most extreme aspect of this hyper-local aspect that I described before. 70% of podcast consumption is local for shows characterized as politics and current events or read news. And that's probably, again, not hugely surprising to you. I think people want to hear about the topics and moments that really matter in their society, and they want to hear it in the language that they're most used to speaking and listening in. And I think you can read this stat in 2 ways. On one hand, it's very challenging to scale the reach of your content to audiences perhaps outside your immediate borders, although I think we have some good examples of what can happen there to scale that. But I think secondly, you could read this as a huge point of inspiration. I do really believe that the people in this room are best placed to win in terms of the evolution of news podcasting content in their markets. You are the ones who are the local experts. You know the context of the issues that matter most, and you know the audience you're speaking to best. And I think if I were reading this stat, I would see that as a sort of call to arms and action on making that happen. The news podcast charts sort of generally reflect this as well. You see different, news pieces topping the charts everywhere you go. In terms of sort of talking about how to make a piece of news content that resonates best, I am not the best placed person to tell you that. And so what I did was I've asked the folks behind Café de Manhã, which is the biggest news podcast in Brazil. It's in Portuguese. But the team behind this, to kind of tell the story of how they made this happen. And you can have a break from my voice for a couple of minutes and hear it, hopefully directly from them if this plays.
We can start.
Okay, hello everybody.
Hi.
Hello Ali. I don't know if we're here in the presentation, but I'm trying here. Or maybe we're here. Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah.
Hello everybody on Prague.
Hi.
So Victor and I, we work here at Spotify in Brazil, in São Paulo, and we are behind the birth of Café da Manhã, one of the biggest shows in Brazil, and it's a Spotify original, right?
Yeah, that we do in partnership with Folha, and I think that the best way to describe how it started is to say that we're there from the start in a way, right? Viseu hosted and I edited, but that's not
For
really how it started.
Yeah,
There
yeah.
was a podcast before that.
Exactly. In 2018, we produced a show about all the Brazilian presidents, Victor and I, and that Spotify paid attention on it. And then we started, both sides wanted to produce a daily news show. And we started those conversations. We had the daily as a clear benchmark. And we finally launched it in the beginning of 2019.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that this relationship with Folha boils down to the journalism that Folha does, and we really trust the journalism that they do. So I think that we benefited in a way from being there from the start, so we can attest it out here on Spotify. But it's worth noting that Folha is very critical of all sides of political parties, and also that in a way we benefited, I'd say, from very eventful years in Brazilian politics. So Café very much felt needed in a way on like the cultural zeitgeist of podcasts.
And do you want to talk a little bit more about our involvement
Oh
with
yeah,
the
of
show?
course. That makes perfect sense. I think one thing that differs from Café is that we still have a very good relation with the host and the team that is behind Café. We don't talk necessarily with Folha management, or the same way that we do with other types of productions.
Yeah, because they are our former colleagues. We both worked there until recently.
Yeah. And when we have, of course, those insights from production from Spotify, it's so easy to share them across Folha of, hey, let's do this special on Zelensky because the war in Ukraine is a very research for topic and stuff like that.
Yeah, and we try to give all the support for them in terms of on-platform and off-platform promotion. And yeah, as Vitor said, strategic feedback to achieve broader audiences, I would say.
And I think this is a good point where we can maybe talk about Passado a Quente also.
Yeah,
which
for
is
sure.
a way that we found of Viseu's best person to explain the show, but it's a way that we found of strengthening our relationship with Folha, at the same time strengthening our relationship with listeners and getting a lot of consumption hours.
Yeah, Passado Quente was that you can search on Spotify. Is in-house production that we decided to publish inside Café da Manhã feed to increase its audience, and it's a mini series that tells the story of the last 10 years in Brazil that, as Victor mentioned, were quite eventful. And well, we have been publishing as we speak now the episodes on weekends, and thanks to it, we are achieving unprecedented numbers in consumption hours in Café da Manhã. So I think it's that shows how the both sides are working together. Us with this mini series and all the strategic inputs, and Café with the day-to-day production.
Yeah. And I think we could maybe close saying the relationship, how this benefited both sides.
For sure.
Really. We helped in a way to even establish Folha's podcasting effort in a way. I think to a stretch, it's hard to imagine that Folha, which now is somehow of a key player in podcasting in Brazil, they launched a series called A Mulher da Casa Abandonada, which was a very big hit in 2022. It's hard to imagine them releasing those types of shows if it wasn't for the podcasting effort that was embedded in their DNA, thanks to putting a daily news show, which is very, very hard.
And also, I don't know if you already mentioned that, but it helped them to achieve the podcast effort, helped them to achieve younger audiences, and to us, there is of course the benefits of partnering with such a high quality, trusted content producer as for it São Paulo.
And just also to close it off on the future and the present of Café, it's a big export for us.
Sure.
I mean, that's ironically being that the name is coffee and how export it is, but
That's so Latin America.
That is so Latin America, but it's now on Mexico, Chile, and Colombia as well, and it's a very established format, so it's easy to be reproduced in a way. It's a single topic of the news, and then at the end of the episode, you get a little brief of whatever was discussed.
So normally the most important topic of the day, so people feel they have to listen to the show. So I think to sum up, all those things make café make all those things make café stay on top of the rankings, right?
Yeah, and I think the slogan that we have for Café da Manhã in Brazil, which is like the most important meal of the day type of joke, o podcast mais importante do seu dia, really resonates to this day of what café really is.
We should have started saying that, but café da manhã means breakfast.
Oh, yeah.
Now we understand the reference.
And that's how we can close that off. Hope you guys have a great time. And
Bye-bye.
Bye.
So yeah, Victor and Vizu were very sad not to actually come to Prague. When I said, could you send a video, they said we could get on the plane if that was an option. But yeah, I hope that helps as a sort of example of a very established brand like Folha, one of the leading news organizations in the market, and how they have kind of brought their podcasting efforts to life. I think the thing to say is it's not a requirement. We a really interesting example from the UK at the moment is one of the top podcasts in the news and politics category is essentially being done by these guys independently. They are themselves big names. Rory Stewart is the blue side of the equation, speaking on the sort of conservative issues. He is a former MP, and Alastair Campbell may be very well known to this group. He was the communications director for the Blair Labour government. And the whole concept is to disagree agreeably on the topics and issues of the day. But these are two individuals who have gone and somewhat independently created this show and find themselves with a massive audience and doing it in a way that's not reliant on, the most sophisticated production setup, as you can see by what's on the side. They actually do most of it remotely with each other, but have really found a very engaged audience and have committed to publishing, numerous episodes per week to do that. The next piece I would mention is the shows I've just talked about in terms of Café de Mania and the rest is politics are always on podcasts. And I think one of the really interesting trends we're seeing just now is the role that limited series are playing in boosting the output of news organizations and finding completely different audiences from perhaps what they traditionally would. So a really nice example of this is Sweet Bobby. It tells a catfishing scandal story that's taken place in the UK over the past few years. It's true crime, but it's kind of very high quality journalism from Tortoise, a small kind of startup news business based out of London. And what this show does so well is it kind of opens up so many new commercial opportunities for what they're trying to do. So on one hand, it gives them inventory to sell advertising in an entertainment show. It also is a big content marketing vehicle for them. They drive the traffic that comes to this podcast, which was a huge kind of cultural moment and hit in the market, back to their always-on daily news podcast, and back to their core news offering, which is a subscription service. So I think it's a really nice example of using the opportunity of storytelling in this way to find new audience. And for the journalist who voiced the story, Alex, I think it was the way the story was meant to be told. There are some stories that are meant to be in print. There are some that are meant to be video. And I think this was a great example of one that was meant to be told in audio. Another business who do this really well is the Wall Street Journal. They have a show called The Journal. It's a daily podcast that, as I'd say, publishes every day, but you probably got that. But what they've done really nicely is broken up the monotony of what can become a daily news podcast by giving their big stories the space they need to shine. So they often publish 4 to 6 episode mini-series down exactly the same podcast feed as they publish their main show. They've had Hack Me If You Can, the Facebook Files, where the journalists who were responsible for those stories had the space and time to tell them in the fullest way, in an episodic way too. They're currently on How to Build a Metaverse. It's fantastic. I think the 3rd episode comes out today. We would highly recommend it. But I think it's a great example of using a limited series to find new opportunities to grow audience within the primary brand of the news business. And I'd say the next piece I obviously have to touch on is Spotify. Is we as a platform know that we also have an obligation and a duty in all of this too, to play our part in making content more discoverable and making it easier for news organizations to monetize and grow audience too. This is Daily Drive. It's something we've worked with some of you in this room, I think, on rolling out. It's available in a handful of European markets. It's a bit of a radio-like experience. It's trying to be a concept that we put into the car where we match personalized music, so algorithm delivered music based on listeners' tastes, with the same podcast content for each listener. So I'll show you a sort of 10-second demonstration of what this does.
Here's your daily drive for Friday. Next, all you need to know from the Times.
This is the Times afternoon briefing on Friday, the 15th of July. The Met Office has issued its first ever...
If you want to know, just ask Supla. We know what a home is really worth.
So interesting, it finishes with an ad, which also shows you a bit about how they are using that as well. But I also wanted to give a quick example. This is quick sort of 30 seconds of how Tortoise have benefited from this as well. The news organization I mentioned before, we work very closely with them on Daily Drive, and this is their sort of take on how that's been for their business.
In January 2021, we launched the Sense Maker. One story every day to make sense of the world. It's a unique format compared to other daily news podcasts out there. Each episode is 5 to 8 minutes long and covers everything from the fight for equality in women's football to HRT the Davina effect to life under Shanghai's lockdown. Being included in the Spotify Daily Drive playlist means we are able to consistently guarantee hundreds of thousands of weekly listeners. This not only delivers impressive reach to a ready audience 5 days a week, but also gives us the numbers needed to drive meaningful revenue from advertising and sponsorship. Crucially, the reach that we get through the Daily Drive enables us to promote Tortoise and what we stand for, recommend other Tortoise shows to our SenseMaker audience through host-read promotions, and invite listeners to join Tortoise as a member for access to more of our journalism and online and newsroom events.
Nice. So I hope this has given you a bit of a flavour of the kind of variety of opportunities that I think exist in this space. It's evolving incredibly quickly, and I think that presents, in many ways, like more opportunity for innovation as well. We're very eager to work with you and hear from you as well on what it is you need to be successful in the audio space. In I think many of the markets you're from, Spotify is the leading podcast provider. In some, we're trying very hard to be. But this is a quick snapshot of our team that are based in Europe and good points of contact. If you're in a market where there's not someone, you can always contact me. It's good help for me building the business case to grow the team a little bit further as well. But I would love to, obviously I'll be around afterwards, happy to take any questions. And if I have time, I can take some questions just now as well. Super. Thank you so much. Sure. Do you want my mic? Or you have one? Or you can shout.
Thank you for your presentation. It was very interesting to hear. And my question, I guess you already covered it a little bit in Daily Drive, but I was just interested if Spotify has certain algorithm to promote podcasts in certain regions. As a podcast producer, for example, what we should do on the technical side to be on the top of rating, and if you can talk more about the promotion stuff. Sure.
It's a complicated topic of which there are probably people that understand the algorithm much better than I do. But I think the challenge and the role that we have to play in the equation is making sure that users who are looking for the content you're producing can find it in a quick and easy way, and that you're provided with the opportunity to scale the reach of your content to audiences who may not know about it now but do want to down the line. And I think Daily Drive is a good example of where people in that like drive time experience, we know that's the kind of content they're looking for, the sort of news introduction to their day alongside the music that they love. But there's a lot of work to do, I would say, in this space, and I think that's why staying close with you on what on the creation side, the creator needs are, matching those with the user need is, I think, the responsibility we have as a platform to do that in the most responsible way.
Thank you.
Hi. Right now, Ukraine is like everywhere, and I am from Ukraine. And the problem with Spotify that Spotify podcast is still not available in Ukraine, as it was available in Russia, let's say. And for many Ukrainian podcasters, the problem is to make podcasts in Ukrainian, and thus they move to Russian to be available for Russian-speaking audiences. Right now, it's no-go for Ukrainians, and do you want to improve that, or somehow to have that curated, like for any Westerner curated homepage with podcasts, because like we have this problem like serious.
Yeah, a great question. And let's do some technical troubleshooting after this. So the podcast, Spotify launched in Ukraine as a music-only service, but did add podcasts a month ago. So podcasts should be available in Ukraine to all users now. We've also closed our service in Russia, so it's no longer available there as well. But let's double check. I'm not sure why you wouldn't get podcasts, but it definitely is launched and live.
I mean, there's lots of lot of stuff can be done in Ukraine and can be distributed in English as well.
Yeah.
So this is a problem. Like lots of Ukrainians even cheated to get a Russian account.
Yeah, definitely, it should be available for all users, 100%.
Hi, thank you so much. I was just wondering, what are the biggest advantages of actually partnering up with you? And I mean, in terms of, if I have already a content and I have a podcast that I'm creating and I'm already sharing it, distributing it on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all these other platforms, what does it exactly mean to be partners with you? What can you bring to the table that is different from, the other option?
Sure, I think that is what we're advocating is distributing content through the service. I think ultimately Spotify wants to be the best place that creators and publishers can go to grow their audience and generate revenue if those are the key things that they want to achieve. And I think to do that in a meaningful way, it has to be in a more scaled manner than having to speak to me or someone else. So that's great. I'm glad to hear you're on the service and using it. And if you have feedback about how we could do it better, that's I think the key ask we have at the moment is making sure it is that platform in your distribution channels as well.
You said a lot of podcasts are listened locally, but many also could have an international reach. And currently, Spotify is set up in a way that the categories that you have, you only get suggestions from your own country. You cannot even choose the language internationally. You cannot choose several countries, which also limits in a way the producers' possibility to reach out, because they are never ever shown in a different country, even though, I mean, if you search for it specifically, yes, but then you know it already. So is there the plan to maybe change that so you can specifically look for certain like podcasts in certain languages, podcasts in other countries than the one you're based in?
Yeah, I love this question. This is like a huge passion point of mine. So we should talk about this afterwards because I'd love to get your ideas on what we should be doing. We recently added a feature where if you go into search, you can view the charts in whichever country you would like to. So you can see what's kind of top of the charts in various places. But you're right, it's difficult for, I take any language really. French is a good example where there are French speakers living in so many different markets. And if we are just programming French content to the boundaries of France as a country, you're missing out on a huge portion of audience. So it's definitely something I think as a platform have a lot of work to do on in terms of giving users that customization of what language they want to be listening to where. So this is a very good point, and I think particularly pertinent to news content as well, which we can get into. Okay, any more questions? I'll be here. So I'm very happy to chat with this. I could do it all day. But thank you so much. Appreciate it.